Now let's discuss that further with Tony Gosling, historian and investigative journalist joining us from Bristol. Mr. Gosling, thank you for your time. I wanted your initial thoughts on this, and how serious do you see the risk of this turning into a direct military confrontation?
Well, I mean, isn't it humorous, actually, that Donald Trump is making waves to try and stop, apparently, if you believe it, the Ukraine conflict. He's brought about a cessation of the genocide, at least less people dying every day in Gaza. But it's almost as if he can't stop himself. He's decided that the killing is going to have to start taking place somewhere else. What he's been doing with the oil blockade, which he's now instituted around Venezuela, what the United States Navy has done here, a nice picture of a hovercraft there, by the way, is bringing at least 8 ships in this strike group. It's not a flotilla, it's a strike group. And that means the USS Gerald Ford, which is the biggest aircraft carrier on planet Earth. So there's aircraft carriers. Each one of these carries about 90 aircraft on there, as well as guided missile destroyers, amphibious assault ships. Now, you don't use those unless you're actually bringing troops in, and of course there's thousands of troops on these ships. So this is an extremely aggressive act by the Donald Trump. A couple of 100 miles off of the north coast of Venezuela and other parts of the Caribbean. These are being used, no doubt, as part of the illegal under international law destruction of the fishing vessels that Trump says, without any evidence, are being used for drug trafficking. And if they are being used for drug trafficking, you can be almost certain that the Central Intelligence Agency, the United States, is behind that drug trafficking. So this is a really appalling act, and you ask me, will it turn to war? Can it turn to war? Well, I noticed that Mexico and Brazil have both urged restraint. Now, this urging of restraint, whether it's by Guterres at the United Nations or by the Brazilians and the Mexicans, is a mature approach. Now, this is a sensible way to do things. They're not threatening the United States. They're not saying, if you attack, we'll attack you, or anything like that. They're doing everything they can to avoid conflict. This is how mature, civilized countries operate. But the United States is not like that. The United States thinks that because they're having problems with their reserve currency, and it looks like their hegemony might never happen, that they're getting very aggressive, and so they're threatening countries in a similar way, actually, to Nazi Germany in the 1930s, was issuing threats to surrounding countries in Europe all the time, and eventually obviously invading places like Czechoslovakia, Poland, these sorts of countries. So the United States, I'm afraid now, we have to treat them rather like we did 1930s Nazi Germany.
All right. Mr. Gosling, how are regional powers like Brazil and Mexico positioning themselves? How will they position themselves if this conflict escalates further?
Well, they will obviously try and keep out of it. They'll try and mediate. But really we need to have pressure, don't we, from the Security Council at the United Nations, and constant diplomatic pressure. The obvious thing to do is to bring in ships from other powers, such as China, as peacekeeping forces into the Caribbean. What Trump is doing strategically with his new boss of Southcom, and let's be clear, who is behind this? This is Southcom. It's based in Florida. They're called Southern Command, and it is a Pentagon office which dominates South America. The idea is that everything that happens in South America is at the behest of the Pentagon and the United States, and they're using and projecting military power. And of course, Venezuela has roughly 20% of the world's oil reserves. That's what Trump wants. That will prop up the dollar. And so those countries, I think, are sitting there very carefully watching and thinking, what are we going to do? And what they should be doing, of course, is to be putting on diplomatic pressure to at least equal the United States US Navy force in the Caribbean, in order to let the Americans know that they can't just threaten whichever country they want with naval power, whether that be naval power projected in the Mediterranean Sea, whether it be maybe in the Baltic or elsewhere, wherever in the world the United States are. And of course, the Chinese have been at the cutting edge of this as well, being subjected to strike forces with aircraft carriers sailing towards them. I think we need to counter this with equal presence of foreign navies, so that if there is some sort of attempt by these amphibious assault ships to bring an invasion against Venezuela, God forbid, that the US Navy knows that there are forces in the area that may disagree with them and may actually sink the ships and stop them.
Mr. Gosling, you mentioned United Nations Security Council. At this point, what does the UN realistically have left in its toolbox beyond statements urging restraint?
Nothing. I'm afraid that's the impotence of the UN. There are some hero figures in all this, though. One of them is Admiral Alvin Halsey. He resigned in August as the chief of Southcom. He's a long-time US Navy man, been decades serving in the United States Navy, and he's made it clear to the Trump administration and to the whole world that he is not prepared to sanction this sort of threatening mafia tactic against a peaceful country that the United States should be peacefully trading with. It's taken months for him to be replaced. I don't know if you've noticed. I'm sure many of the general staffs of the South American nations and other countries which observe the United States have noticed they've only just appointed a new head of Southcom, Lieutenant General Evan Pettus, who's from the Air Force, which does tell us that there may be an Air Force element in the plans that the United States is thinking about. Maybe they've realised that the US Navy is an old-fashioned organisation. If it's quite possible, by the way, that if they do decide to attack using the US Navy, that the Venezuelans may just sink all those ships. And so maybe that's one of the hidden agendas behind the swapping of the chiefs around from the Navy to the Air Force at Southcom, based in Florida, which oversees all the Pentagon operations and trying to dominate South America, that this guy has been put in place because the Americans realise they can't do very much from the sea in the modern age. They're going to have to use their Air Force if they want to have a war with Venezuela, which I hope to God they don't even contemplate, because the Americans are actually likely to lose it.
Well, thank you so much for your insight. That was Tony Gosling, historian and investigative journalist, joining us from Bristol.